live pictures right now from Portland, Oregon. There were demonstrations across the country overnight that are still going on right now in some places, including Portland. Now, I say demonstrations. This that you're looking at in Portland was actually declared a riot by the Portland Police Department. That because of some of the violent acts that were committed there. Some cars were damaged and also things thrown at police. So the technical term they used for it was a riot, though, you know, that may be a term that to some people means more than we've actually seen pictures of right there. But you can still see there are tense moments on the streets of Portland, and you can see that there's a lot of deep feelings about this election that are going to last for a long time around the country. This is happening as the Trump team, the team for President-elect Trump, is putting the transition in motion right now. He holds his first official meeting with that team today here in New York. Let's talk.
Key people in these types of positions.
Paris, and I want to get to this point, back to this point, whether it be in this segment or in the future, because there's a lot to talk about in that position. But I want to show people what's happening right now in the streets of Portland. This is breaking news happening right now. This appears to be, I don't know if it's tear gas, it could be smoke, but some kind of device now being used by police to disperse the crowds, we think, there on Portland. These demonstrations have been going on across the country overnight. In Portland specifically, again, police are saying they're more than demonstrations. They are riots because of the damage to property and also the danger posed to law enforcement. Things have been thrown at them. I suppose let's keep these pictures up while we bring up the subject of Donald Trump's response to the protests overnight. And Eugene, Scott, let me just read you the tweet again from Donald Trump. He said, "Just had a very open and successful presidential election. Now professional protesters incited by media are protesting. Very unfair." Look, I mean, I wouldn't expect Donald Trump to be happy with these protests. But I think that on either side, had Hillary Clinton won, we would have seen demonstrations and they would have been understandable. You're seeing these demonstrations that are understandable. I don't think there's any evidence they're caused by professional protesters, given the fact that they sprouted up across the country. And I don't see there's any evidence that they're incited by the media. I feel like the media the last 2 days has actually been overwhelmingly laudatory of how everyone is calling for a peaceful transition. But what's your opinion on this?
Well, my opinion is, you know, the right thing to do when trying to handle conflict and tension is to be able to explain your opponent's position and views in a way that they would recognize. And if you speak with these protesters, they will tell you that they aren't out here because of the media. They will tell you that they are out here protesting policies and ideas that Donald Trump put forward, just like Donald Trump supporters would have been protesting policies that Hillary Clinton's people put forward. And the reality is, when Donald Trump supporters have gone on to say that they would have protested the outcome, Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, did not rebuke them. This is a very partisan response to what is happening from many segments of the American population. And
Donald Trump has an uphill battle here in a divided nation, trying to unite everybody. But you're hearing people who are protesting, people who didn't vote for Donald Trump, saying he is not my president. So he is starting from a tough spot.
You know, there's a touch of irony. I promise you, a lot of the people on the streets right now don't feel a particular tie to the media after this election. Josh, we're gonna come back to this in a little bit. We're gonna get to some other news, but I just want to say we are keeping our eye on what's happening on the streets of Portland as this situation develops. We'll be right back.
And welcome back. You're looking at live pictures from Portland, Oregon. It's a little after midnight. And these are demonstrations that you're seeing, anti-Trump protests, which Portland police are calling riots at this point. Right now, it's looking much calmer than what we saw just earlier.
Yeah, just a few minutes ago, literally just a few minutes ago, we saw some kind of smoke device or dispersal device, whether it's tear gas or something else. I'm not sure it was tear gas based on what you're seeing right now. It seems unlikely that that's the case, but there was something used to try to disperse the crowds. Clearly, these are tense moments on the streets of Portland. Demonstrations across the country, specifically in Portland, Oregon, police there have called them riots because of some damage to property and also threats to police.
All right, let's go ahead and bring back in our panel to talk about this more. We've got CNN commentator Paris Thenard, a Donald Trump supporter, CNN political analyst Josh Rogin. He's a columnist for The Washington Post. And here with us is CNN politics reporter Eugene Scott, an extraordinaire of everything. Let me first go to you, Paris, because you know, these are angry voters. These are angry Americans about the outcome of this election. Donald Trump has a tall hill to climb in trying to unite this country.
Well, he does, and I think that he set the right tone with his victory speech on Tuesday evening, early Wednesday morning. I think that his message yesterday after meeting with President Obama set the right tone. He was very respectful. He was presidential because he is the president-elect, and I think that he is forward-thinking, forward-moving. President Obama is forward-thinking, forward-moving. I think Secretary Clinton set the right tone in her speech after she conceded the election. So I think the American people have to unite and understand and accept the fact that President-elect Donald Trump is going to be the President of the United States. And we have to find ways, if you don't agree with his policies or his things that he proposed, to find things that you do agree with and work together to make this country great again. That's the only way we can heal. That's the only way we can come together. And I hope that Democrats, like Secretary Clinton, will, and Bernie Sanders, which a lot of these people that are protesting identify with him even more, will come out and say, this is inappropriate, this is not right, let's unite, let's come together and work towards common goals where we can find them. Common goals like the economy, common goals like jobs, common goals like criminal justice reform, education. I think there's things that we can find common ground on, and that's the important thing as we move forward with a country.
And again, just as you were talking, Paris, we saw things thrown at police officers there. We saw, a trash barrel being turned over right there. And Josh, I want to get your take on this, but I just want to, Paris, just a quick response. Donald Trump has said very conciliatory things over the last, 37 or 40 hours or so. So too is President Obama. So too is Hillary Clinton. Everyone is saying and doing the right things. No question about that. Throwing things at cops right now, that's never the right thing. But protesting, there's nothing wrong with protests, are there? You're not suggesting that people don't have a right to try to make their voice heard. You're not saying that, are you?
No, I'm not saying people do not have a right to protest. I am saying that you do have a right to vote, and so I would have hoped that all these, if any of these protesters did not vote, I don't think that they have a right to be out. Well, I don't think they should be out there protesting if you did not vote. President Obama always said, "Don't boo, vote."
Right.
But you do have a right to protest, but it always should be peaceful, it always should be respectful, and it should always not include violence, especially at our law enforcement.
Okay.
That's inappropriate on either side.
Josh, you want to jump in on this conversation and give us your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I second your point here that protesting, peaceful protesting, is not only a right, it's patriotic, and it goes back to the foundations of our nation. But I also wanted to go back to your earlier point, John, which I thought was a great one, which is that Donald Trump's reaction to this, namely that this was a professional protesters incited by the media, is not true, okay? It's pretty clear that that's not the case, okay? So looking at that reaction, you can only draw one of two conclusions. Either, he's lying and he's trying to sort of play the victim and demonize the protesters, or let's say he believes it, then he doesn't understand what's going on in the streets, okay? And there's a lot of tension, and it doesn't have to get violent, but it could get violent. That's what we're all trying to avoid. That's what President Obama's trying to avoid, so the media would try to avoid if we had so what Donald Trump is doing is he's not responding to that or even acknowledging that exists, and that's problematic. Only 48 hours after he said he wants to be a president for all Americans, this is his first test, and he's failing the test. These are Americans, Donald Trump, and if you want to be president for these people, you have to first acknowledge their right to have these feelings and to have these grievances.
Okay, for those who are just joining us, it is 3:30 in the morning Eastern Time. This is Early Start, and we've got some breaking news, as you can see on the screen there. New protests against Donald Trump's election rattling the nation in more than a dozen cities, from Philadelphia to Phoenix. These, once again, are shots from Portland. These protests happening for a second night in a row. Here in Portland, though, police officially declaring the protest a riot after demonstrators threw projectiles at officers, smashing car and storefront windows. The Portland Police Twitter feed warned that rioting is a Class C felony. And I want to ask you this, Eugene. These are images that presumably are being broadcast around the world. How are
we are around? I think we're being watched around the world right now. So
how is this being perceived? Is this undermining the presidency of President-elect Trump?
We are being watched. Yesterday morning when we were on and got a response from a viewer in Europe, and the reality is people even internationally are very concerned about what is going to happen in this next administration. to Paris's point, I think a lot of people do want to give Mr. Trump a fair chance and to see what he can do. He had this great speech following his victory saying that he wanted to be the leader for all Americans. But when you suggest that people are acting irrationally, who very much have strong opinions about the policy proposals you put forward, it does suggest what Josh mentioned, that you really don't understand a significant percentage of the American voters who voted against you.
Yeah, Paris, is that the tweet that Donald Trump tweeted about these protests, is that very presidential? I mean, should he at least have maybe said in part of that tweet, we're a divided nation, I want to bring everybody together, I'm a president for everybody? You know, could that line have maybe softened it a bit?
I mean, you only have 140 characters, but I think it's important for the viewers to understand and remember that a lot of the things that are being said about the tweet are inaccurate. He did not talk about these protesters did not have a right to protest. He did not invalidate any of the protesters there. What he said was he felt that they were professional protesters incited by the media, and he called that unfair, meaning that the media was doing that, not talking about the protesters. But I think at the end of the day, what President-elect Trump is saying is, I don't think he wants to believe that these are Americans that are out there doing that these are Democrats out there doing that, because he believes in the greatness of the American people, hoping that we could rise above this, because to your point earlier, the world is watching. America is known for having a peaceful transfer of power, where we vote, we have free elections, you vote freely, you can vote early, you can vote often, and then you move forward with the governance of the country. And so it's hard for people to accept the fact that Americans are out there, Democrats are out there, this is the response. The response should not be violence toward police officers or destruction of property. That should never be the response.
So violence, you know, should never be the response. You talk about, you know, our system, what's great about America. Another thing great is the freedom of speech and the freedom to protest.
Right.
And what you're seeing necessarily in the streets of Portland, or what you're seeing on the streets of Portland right now, and these are live pictures of what's happening in Portland right now. This is not what we've seen across the country. There were thousands and thousands of demonstrators across the country. You know, 95% of them, more, 99% of them walking peacefully and marching peacefully, wanting their voices to be heard. What's happening in Portland tonight, to be clear, the police there have called this a riot because of damage to property and also threats posed to police officers, thrown projectiles and the like. And again, just so people can come up to speed here, let me read you the tweet that Donald Trump put out overnight in response to what these protests are. He said, just had a very open and successful presidential election. Now professional protesters incited by the media are protesting. Very unfair. And again, just to be clear, as we look around the country, there isn't really any evidence that these are professional protesters. This does appear to be sincere feelings of concern from protesters, just as we heard very sincere feelings of concern on Tuesday in this election from people supporting Donald Trump. There is a sense, Eugene Scott, from both sides right now that their voices are not being heard.
Absolutely, and we also don't have proof that these are Democrats, as Paris suggested. We just have proof that these are people who do not support what just happened. The reality is there are people who voted for Donald Trump, in part because they felt like he represented them. He had ideas that they thought needed to be brought to the table, and they wanted their voices heard. The reality is there are lots of people in this country coming from different vantage points who feel unheard, and this is the time that we wonder if the president will listen, and he told us he will, and time will tell.
All right, I want to bring in Simone Sanders. She's a former Bernie Sanders campaign press secretary and a Clinton supporter. Simone, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning.
So you are watching these live pictures along with us. You know, we have a right to protest, but, you know, when you start destroying property, not the most productive way, many think, to express your views. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing?
So, yes, I want to underscore that protesting is a vital part of the American fabric. We achieved this country via protest, and it was not necessarily a peaceful protest. So while I always call for peaceful protests, we all have to understand that there are people out there in America right now, tonight, or this morning, wherever they are, that do not feel peaceful, that feel like their lives are in danger, that feel threatened. And we're in a new time, really, when you have Steve Bannon, who has given a platform of the alt-right, being floated as the chief of staff for the White House, for the People's House. You are going to see unrest. So what you're seeing in the streets right now, what we are seeing in the streets, is really a manifestation of the unrest and the bubbling over, where America is. And for Donald Trump to dismiss President-elect Trump to dismiss the protesters as professional protesters incited by the media just goes to demonstrate just how absolutely aloof he really is to where the people actually are.
And it is interesting, Simone, you just corrected yourself mid-sentence to say President-elect Trump, because it's true. Donald Trump is the President-elect of the United States, and President Obama seemed to actually go out of his way during their meeting, during their photo op, Josh Rogan, to several times use those words, President-elect Donald Trump. He is conveying the clear message that we are in the midst right now of this peaceful transition of power, which in my mind is one of the single greatest things that the United States of America does. We do it so very well, and it should be an example to the entire world. Kellyanne Conway yesterday, a lot of what happens right now is on Twitter. Kellyanne Conway, who was campaign manager for Donald Trump and who's apparently, she says, been offered a job in the Trump administration, has actually called on President Obama to say something about these protests. I wonder if you can get your reaction to that.
Yeah, no, I think President Obama has a healthy respect for the office of the presidency and for the peaceful transition of power, and he's doing his best, right, to sort of bite his tongue. I mean, we heard Josh Earnest say that President Obama still thinks that Donald Trump is unqualified to be president, yet he doesn't see any upside in hitting that mantra now that Donald Trump will be president. So that's one thing. Now, as for Kellyanne Conway calling on President Obama to call off the protesters, I think it sort of shows you that this is not just Donald Trump tweeting in the middle of the night from his apartment in Trump Tower. This is their strategy. This is what the Trump team and its surrogates are going to say about these protests. And these protests are going to go on, okay? This is the beginning, not the end. It's going to get worse before it gets better. That's not my hope. That's just my prediction. And what the whole Trump structure is going to say is they're going to say, oh, well, Democrats, you got to rein in your people, okay? So that's not going to help, okay? And we could have an intellectual argument about who's to blame. Did Donald Trump, cause this by dragging us down into the gutter for a year? I think there's a good argument for that, but putting that to one side, what's he going to do now? Is he going to just be the campaigner, Donald Trump, or is he going to be President Donald Trump? Early indications are that it's the former, and that's really the most troubling thing of all.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and then jump back and get Paris's reaction. We'll be right back.
All right, looking at live pictures now from Portland, Oregon. There have been demonstrations all night, thousands of people on the streets all night and into the morning across the country protesting the results of the election. What you're looking at right now in Portland, Oregon has gone beyond, police say, just peaceful protests. The police in Portland say these are actually riots because of damage to property and also things thrown at police. And I have to say, we have our Twitter up here, and I can see people's reaction to what they're seeing and what we're saying. There are a lot of strong feelings on I want to say both sides, but there are more than two sides here, because we have Donald Trump supporters saying what they're seeing on the streets here is awful. We have people who are upset about the results of the election saying, that it's wonderful. We have people saying it's the media's fault. It's not the media's fault. We have people saying all sorts of things. I encourage you, join in this discussion. Tell us what you think about what you're seeing on Twitter, because I think it's an important time for everyone to talk and figure out if we can understand what's happening in this country, whether it be some of the anger we heard on Election Day or some of the anger we are seeing right now on the streets of Portland. So as we talk about this, please join the conversation on Twitter with us.
And we've got a whole slew of political commentators joining the discussion. We've got Simone Sanders. She's the former Bernie Sanders campaign press secretary and a Clinton supporter. Paris Denard, a Donald Trump supporter. CNN political analyst Josh Rogan, a columnist for The Washington Post. And here with us on the set, CNN politics reporter Eugene Scott. Good morning to everybody. Paris, to you. Donald Trump campaigned as the law and order candidate. This could be his opportunity to really show his might, being that person. What should he do?
I think Mr. Trump should, while he was the law and order candidate, he was much more than that. President-elect Trump tapped into a frustration, in my opinion, that crosses color lines. It crossed socioeconomic lines and regional lines. He tapped into a frustration that the American people from all walks of life were facing. They felt left out. They were in fragile communities, and they felt that this system, that the government had forgotten about them, had failed them in many cases. When you looked at the educational system, when you looked at the violence in some of the inner cities, when you looked at the joblessness and the job unemployment and wage stagnation, and you look at the rise of terrorism, both abroad and at home. And so the frustration that Republicans felt, that Democrats felt, that African Americans felt, that Latinos felt, it manifests itself somehow. And a lot of times you see that acting out in protest. So we can say that they want to be protesting President-elect Trump's election, or some of the things that President-elect Trump might have said during the campaign trail, but there's always an underlying issue. There's always something called the root of the problem or the root of the issue. And once we be able to get to that, then we can have a real serious conversation. And I think that's what that President-elect Trump was trying to do in the campaign, and I think that's why people responded to him in kind, and I think that's how he's going to lead, by making America great again, not just for Republicans, but for everyone, especially those protesters in protesters in Portland, Oregon, and all across this country.
Guys, Simone, stand by for 1 minute. Guys, everyone stand by. With us on the phone right now is Sergeant Pete Simpson. He's the Public Information Officer for the Portland Police Bureau. Sergeant Simpson, thanks so much for being with us. Give us a sense of what's going on the streets of Portland right now. Your police department has declared this a riot.
Yeah, we're still out in downtown Portland addressing a crowd of rioters who have been out for several hours tonight. Right now, we've made multiple arrests over the course of the evening. Things started out at 5 p.m. and it was large and largely peaceful. We estimate somewhere around 4,000 people marching. But over the course of the evening, we started seeing and getting reports of people in the crowd attacking vehicles, and then lots of vandalism to businesses and windows, some fires being started. Once the protests got into downtown Portland, it really shifted from a protest march to a riot. It just was a free-for-all of damage to businesses in the Pearl District. We spoke with and saw some of our folks that we've built relationships with Black Lives Matter. It was one of many groups in this event, and they made it very clear that they were not part of that, and they were actually trying to get these anarchist groups to stop, and they were not listening to them. And so a good number of those folks left the march, and it's presented a lot of challenges for us tonight.
Sergeant Simpson, this is Allison Cossack as well. Are you finding that these anti-Trump protests happening in your city not only include people against the outcome or unhappy with the outcome of the election, but people who are just glomming on and just causing destruction for the sake of it?
Yeah, we have. There's a large combination of folks in the protests. It's definitely started out as a protest about the election results. But as we see here somewhat regularly, there are lots of groups that have lots of issues that come together, and the anarchist Black Bloc segment has been here and well entrenched here, and routinely will insert itself into other events and use the large crowd as an anonymity while they go out and break windows and start fires and damage cars and things. And so, like I said, we've made several arrests. Some folks we're familiar with, some folks we're not familiar with, and as I'm talking to you right now, I can hear our less lethal munitions being deployed out on the streets.
Sorry, one more time, what's being deployed on the streets?
Less lethal munitions, so things like sting ball, less lethal grenades, pepper ball, pepper spray. Our officers in the last couple of hours have taken rocks, bottles, other projectiles being thrown at them from the street, from parking garages. Pretty much anything that's not nailed down has been thrown at the police.
Can you have a sense of how many, as you now call them, rioters are on the streets right now?
The last number I had heard was not too long ago was anywhere from 100 to 200 people. And they, again, this is the leftover group from a much larger group, which was largely peaceful earlier. And a lot of the folks that are out there now are the kind of anarchist folks that, you know, they're really out at every protest we have. It sort of doesn't matter what the issue is. And then certainly there's a fair amount of people who are there for the show, if you will.
So do you feel that this situation is escalating, or do you find your officers are able to get control of this?
Well, I think it's stable in the sense that it's been consistent now for, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours of it's just a battle for control of the streets. You know, we're trying to keep people moving and arrest folks as we can. Fortunately, this part of downtown Portland is really businesses and offices. There's not much residential. There are some hotels, and you know, our goal is to get people to leave the area and go home for the night, and we'll stay out here until we feel like it's safe to leave.
All right, Sergeant Pete Simpson, PIO for the Portland, Oregon Police Department. Thanks so much for calling in and giving us a sense of what is happening on the ground right now, because we've been seeing these pictures and you give it some context. So Sergeant Simpson, thanks so much. Let me recap what the sergeant just said here, because I think it's important. From the perspective of the police, what you're seeing right now on the streets of Portland is several hundred, a few hundred, maybe 100 to 200, maybe more, what he calls anarchists, who are the remnants of what was a largely peaceful protest earlier in the evening. People upset about the results of the election. There were maybe 4,000 people at the beginning. These are the remnants of people that he calls fairly, many of them regular protesters, people who join in, glom on to other things, and he called many of them anarchists. Several arrests have been made, and as of right now on the streets, we were just told the police are using, you know, less lethal methods, we're told, and that means pepper spray, paintballs, smoke grenades, things to try to disperse this crowd, because the 100 to 200 people who are left on the streets of Portland are breaking things and burning things and throwing things at police officers, and they're trying to get this situation under control there.
But despite these pictures, and they're pretty dramatic, the sergeant's saying things are stable. He wants people to just go home at this point.
All right, what we're going to do now, we're keeping our eye on the streets here as the situation is ongoing in Portland. There are also protests we know that are ongoing in Los Angeles as well overnight. I don't believe anything the likes of which we're seeing right now in Portland, but again, this started out as demonstrations across the country, thousands and thousands of people demonstrating against the results of the election on Tuesday. Now what we're seeing is some pockets, small pockets of violence, at least in Portland, Oregon. I think this is tape from before. I just don't want you to think you're looking at live pictures. We saw that happen a few minutes ago in Portland. We're keeping our eye on it. We'll be right back.